So for these instructions, we're going to be using Adobe Flash Professional CS 5.5. When you start it up, you'll notice that you have a whole bunch of things here to choose from. I would suggest that if you want to start from the very beginning, that you click the ActionScript 3.0 button. There are some tutorials here which might be kind of useful for you, but for right now we're just going to go with ActionScript 3.0, which I'll explain to you what that really means later. You'll notice with this layout that we have a big pane here, we have a smaller one at the bottom, and several panes on the right. This is the actual area where we will be doing our work. This is the stage, and then this is kind of a pasteboard area, which for all intents and purposes isn't where you'll be doing your animation, but you can stick stuff over there and it won't show. Down here is the timeline. As we add things, we will be able to animate them. So the first thing I want to show you is that we can change the size of this actual screen. We can change it right here. So we can type in, say, 700 pixels wide, and then it makes it wider. For right now, I'm going to actually keep it at 500 because I think it's a little easier to show you with a smaller stage. So this Properties panel is very important. This is going to show us information about things as we build them. For instance, and I will show you how to do this again, if I were to make a square out here and then select it, you'll notice that now it gives us information about that square. And the same thing is true of pretty much anything that we're going to have on the screen. So now I want to explain to you a bit about what goes on with these panels. Specifically, the Tools panel that we have right here. We'll get to the other ones a bit later. So you'll notice that pretty much when you start up Flash, you have the Selection tool. That basically allows me to move things around once I select them. Or I can click, actually maybe just double click on that outside area of that line and pull that out and move it. So that's all it does. It just allows you to move things. The Subselection tool allows you to change points. Flash is primarily a vector tool, and vectors are made up of points. These points can be pushed and pulled in order to change an image. So the Subselection tool then allows you to click on a point and move it around. If we go back to the Selection tool, let's just call it the Arrow tool for now, and we put our mouse kind of near a line area, a straight edge or what have you, you'll notice that the arrow gets like a little curve to it. If I click and hold down, that allows me to change the shape. So now I can go in close to it. It won't work quite right if you have your image selected, so I click off and deselect something, and then I can click and hold down and move it. Now, if I go back to that Subselection tool, we'll notice that we have these interesting little handles. I'm going to change this color because I think that it'll be easier for you to see if I do so. Let's change it to dark red. So now I click and hold down and select that point, and I have these little handles, and I can make very specific selections on how I want to shape this image. You'll notice as I pull out, I get a different effect than if I move the mouse up and down. And I'm clicking and holding down on that handle, by the way. So I can do that on the other side too and start to make a shape. Sort of looks like a groundhog nose or something at this point. So moving right along then, we have the Free Transform tool. If we click on that in this Tools panel and we click, we'll notice it puts an interesting box around my selection. And if I put my mouse near the corner of the selection, it shows us a little icon that looks round with a little arrow. If I click and hold down then, it allows me to rotate. I also can put it near the little box in the center there and pull out or push in the same way like that. We're going to skip over the 3D rotation tool because that's kind of outside the scope of this class, but maybe we'll get to it later. The next one is the Lasso tool, and if you're familiar with Photoshop, it has a similar function. Basically, it allows us to make our own selection shape. So if I click and hold down and say I make a wiggly line there and then I release, notice how a portion of this now is kind of selected. If I go back to the Arrow tool then, I can pull that out, and now it's its own thing. So next up then we have the Pen tool, which we'll get to in a bit, and the Text tool, which we'll also get to in a bit. But for right now I want to show you the Line tool, which is related to the next one. And it basically just lets you make a line. So the interesting thing here is that I can actually go back, click on that line, and I can change the size of it, the thickness, which is called the stroke. I can also change the color. By clicking on the stroke color right here, it looks like a little pencil. And then I can, say, change it to some other color. I can also make some other changes, like making it dashed, which doesn't really show when the thickness is set so high, but you can see it better as I take it down. I can also set, let's see here, I'll set it back to solid. I can set the cap to square, which, if you look at the edge now, no longer is it rounded, it's square there. Join actually occurs when you have more than one line together. So if I click on these and I set the join to bevel, it cuts off the edge. If I set it to miter, it makes a point. These are just small details that you'll want to keep in mind as you're building your various images. I'm going to delete that for right now. So the next one then is the rectangle tool. Now you'll notice that it has a little tiny triangle mark in the corner of it. That means that we can hold down that tool and then we can select some other tools, like the oval tool. And that's true, by the way, of all of these. Anytime that you click and hold down, it shows you some other selections, as long as there's a little tiny triangle in the corner. So now I can make an oval, and you'll notice that it kept the settings that I had before. If I try to change those settings now, nothing will happen, because that is kind of for the future. But if I go ahead and double click on this, now I can set the stroke. You'll notice that all of this is in the Properties panel. If I click off of it, the Properties panel goes back to the information about the entire screen, as opposed to just the item I'm working with. So I'll double click on that again, and then I can go and change the fill color. I can also do that down here, and also change the stroke color. So I can change it to green or what have you, either way. So the next thing we have then is the pencil tool, which basically allows us to make a line, but not a straight line. There's all sorts of interesting settings for that. I'll let you figure those out. We also have the brush tool, which kind of changes its width based on how you use it. So if I move real slow, it tends to make it thicker, kind of like if you were really using a brush in real life, it adds more paint. If I go really fast, it makes it a little thinner. It's really fun to hook up like a drawing tablet and then draw with it, because you get some really interesting effects. I'm going to skip over the deco tool and the bone tool. That's actually for animation. We'll get to that a bit later.